What I find most interesting right now is that industries can no longer stay in their lane. Innovation in companies have to span across industries, and they have to think about their business in totality. You must look past your current competitor set and industry peers and look towards the best of the best, right? What are other industries doing? Because customers no longer differentiate by industry. The businesses also cannot.
Welcome to This is Digital, a podcast brought to you by West Monroe. Join us as we talk to leading experts about bringing the digital mindset to your organization.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to This is Digital. In each podcast episode, we explore what it means to be digital, not just do digital. I'm your host, Rissa Reddan, Partner and Chief Marketing Officer at West Monroe. West Monroe is a digital services firm. We are thinkers and makers who bring hands-on experience and technical know-how to get things done and to deliver lasting value. I am delighted to welcome back my colleague, Casey Foss, Chief Commercial Officer at West Monroe. You will remember Casey from our very first episode of Season 1, which was one of our most downloaded episodes. Casey is passionate about building the consulting firm of the future, bringing together multidisciplinary teams with leading-edge technology, design thinking, and proprietary assets to design offerings that will help clients become digital leaders. Today, Casey joins us to discuss West Monroe's latest ebook, highlighting trends in the technology landscape. Casey, we have a lot to discuss, so let's get started. Let's talk a little bit about why we published this ebook and why now. Could you please set the stage for us?
Sure. Rissa, remember there was a time, right, when firms used to publish books annually about the megatrends that were impacting organizations throughout the year. And unfortunately, that's no longer the case, right? Everything is changing at such a rapid pace between the market, organizational change, new tech trends. The business leaders today have to pivot and react to the changing landscape all the time. Uncertainty and upheaval in the market are really causing these market level shifts. However, for the first time, technology and the pace of change don't really match the economic conditions from both a technical and an economic perspective, right? And so business leaders are paralyzed to make business decisions because they must make them for both the long term and the short term. And that's really hard to find that balance. And so we really wanted to get these top 5 things that we're seeing clients across our industry struggle with and make it a little bit easier and more actionable today and help them plan for the long term.
And with the 5 trends that you mentioned, Casey, how did we land on each of them? And what was the vetting process like to determine which 5 were the most meaningful?
So one thing that was interesting is we started to realize across the 9 industries that we serve, the same themes and customer expectations were coming up over and over again. And one of the things that I believe West Monroe does very differently than a lot of our competitors and organizations on the industry side is we really rely on this multidisciplinary brain trust across the firm, technologists, product experts, change experts, industry experts. And we tapped into each of them and thought about how these changes might affect both short and long-term growth opportunities across the industries we serve. And then we started to ask ourselves how clients could navigate that environment and give them some real practical solutions. And the thing that I found so interesting as well, and as you look through the Tech Trends ebook, you'll notice that Gen AI appears at the back. But what's even more impactful is the reason we placed it there is because we fundamentally believe it weaves through every one of the trends that are facing the industry segments we serve today.
And Casey, what are the top 3 takeaways from your vantage point as Chief Commercial Officer at West Monroe?
So the first one I would say is learn to separate the fundamentals from the fads. Thanks to the rapid fire pace of technology change, it can be easy to get caught up in the hype or the latest buzz, which really causes a lot of fits and starts and stops with how people are applying technology to what they do. But by understanding the challenges of modern business and where you might go leading into technology, you have to apply the lens of what's here today that might be gone tomorrow. You need to pay attention, be agile, and listen so you never lose sight of the fundamentals of what your customers actually want and need. And there's a few examples of that in the book. The second is get comfortable taking risks, right? In the not so distant past, organizations that made it to the top of the food chain in the industries they served stayed there unless they made a mistake or had a huge fall. These days, unfortunately, no industry is safe from disruption, and businesses aren't safe from being displaced. And that's why organizations can never stop experimenting with new things, new ways of reaching customers, new products and services, et cetera, new digital technologies, right, that all augment the existing workforces. And then the third and final one I would say, and I hit on this a little bit already, is make bets on the present, but do not forget about the future. It may feel like we've been living with uncertainty, economic or otherwise, for a long time. But in the digital age, uncertainty is the new status quo, and it's time to get comfortable in that space. That's really why we start to see some leaders who have to find a way to kind of move past the paralysis that they're in right now and make near-term decisions and find the one or two things that they can invest in, try, or change on a dime if they're not working.
Casey, I'm reminded of a conversation that we had in a previous episode with Betsy Ziegler at 1871, and she talked about this idea of celebrating failure. What would be your advice that, to try these new things, something isn't necessarily a guaranteed home run? How do you persuade people to take risks and to be more risk friendly versus risk averse?
So I think it's important when you take a risk to understand when you're not seeing the returns that you want, right? Oftentimes it's very hard. It goes against all human nature, right? To say, I tried something and it didn't work. And so what tends to happen is we let things linger. We wait for them to get better. We wait for them to have an impact. And what's interesting in my role as the chief commercial officer is we created a ton of net new repeatable offerings that we put into the market based on buyer needs, right? And let's be clear, of them, some of them do not work. They don't generate revenue. And instead of continuing to put money behind them and iterate at them, it's knowing when to pull them out of market and invest in something else, because everything is about making choices. And when you're putting all of your efforts into one thing, you're missing a different opportunity. And so I think while celebrating failure is key, right? Taking a minute to discuss what you've learned and recognizing somebody for taking a risk is important. I think knowing when enough is enough is the biggest thing that you can do successfully in that space.
Now, you're reminding me of Richard Thaler, a professor at University of Chicago, who teaches a course on biases. And escalation of commitment is exactly what you were talking about, that it's so easy to feel like, well, I've already invested so much, I need to keep investing because I want to see this turnaround or I want to see success. And I'm curious, is your perspective on that, you need to have benchmarks or you need to be looking for a specific return? How do you put that into practice?
Yeah, so I am a huge believer of data and leaning into benchmarks. I have been my entire career, which started in public relations and then has since gone to card member communications at Discover Card and now here at West Monroe. And to me, benchmarks are key into knowing when you're off pace, and every industry has them. Now, that said, I think the thing that you have to do, and I'll give an example here very near and dear to my heart. In 2020, we had spent the first 3 months of the year investing in a new brand for West Monroe, back when I served as the chief marketing officer. And as everybody knows, in March 9th of 2020, nobody was going to care about our new brand, right? And knowing that although the investment had already been made, the market positioning would have been better, we held on launching that because it wasn't the right time and market fit and opportunity. The world was focused on much different things for a much better reason. And having some self-awareness to be able to do that, I think is key, right? And that's a very small example, but I think across the board, paying attention to what's going on around you, whether it be a micro data point or a macro level issue, is how you should be making business decisions.
Well, and a follow-up to that, it sounds as though your counsel is people need to get comfortable with uncertainty. And how do you navigate that? That we are in uncertain times, that has been the refrain in every headline for the last 18 months. How do you think about that as a leader?
I'll point to West Monroe as an organization here. And as we continue to evolve how we go to market, we've taken a few risks. A few years ago, almost 10 at this point, we transitioned from talking about solutions and services in the market to really honing in on the issues that our clients are facing. We changed our entire go-to-market strategy around that. And then over the years, when we reached a certain point, I was asked to shift from serving as the firm's chief marketing officer into serving as the chief commercial officer. And the rationale for that move was because we saw the market shifting again. While these issues were still important and still resonated with our buyers, we were at a size and scale where it was time to launch offerings that could be done in a repeatable fashion so that our buyers could anticipate the value that they were going to get, and so that our teams weren't learning how to do the work each time, but more importantly, spending time and focusing on the clients that they served. Now, while shifting from my perspective was a risk personally, I would say the bigger risk to the firm was changing how we do consulting, right? Taking an opportunity to go from bespoke, custom consulting projects to having that as a core competency, but also replacing some of that with core offerings that are done repeatable with anticipated value took some time and change management. So when you ask me kind of about risk and the change in an organization and living in uncertainty, it's funny because I feel like that's the core of my job, right? I think I do that every day, is how do you bring people along? How much change is enough change to make a difference, but not too much change that the employees within the organization are going to shut down, right? Because it's all about bringing the team along with you. In order to deliver against expectations, you need a group of believers behind you and with you.
Now that we've covered off on the why tech trends and why now, I would love to dive into the ebook. The first trend in the ebook is a rapidly changing and increasingly distributed innovation landscape. Tell us more about what that means in the context of tech trends. What is it? Why does it matter? And what should businesses do about it?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So as I think about a rapidly changing and increasingly distributed innovation landscape, it's what I find most interesting right now is that industries can no longer stay in their lane. Innovation and companies have to span across industries, and they have to think about their business in totality. You must look past your current competitor set and industry peers and look towards the best of the best, right? What are other industries doing? Because customers no longer differentiate by industry. The businesses also cannot. And it matters today because if you think about back, like let's go to 1958, right? The average company lasted 61 years in the S&P 500. By 2016, that was 24 years. And it's forecasted to be 12 years in 2027. And it's shrinking because being at the top no longer means that until you make a mistake, you stay there. It means you're there until somebody out-innovates you, out-thinks you, out-strategizes you, and out-serves your customers. And all of those things tie together. And so from an action-oriented approach, a macro-level change in the B2C industry is now forcing change in industries that are originally B2B, that didn't have to look into the B2C world. But if you think about even how Amazon has changed customers' expectations with how people engage with healthcare providers, right? I now expect a very fluid digital to physical experience when I go see my doctor. I expect them to know the answers to the survey questions that I've submitted. I expect them to know when I'm at their office. I expect them to have all the labs I need prepared. And then when I leave, I expect the summary to be automatic. And that's driven by providers like Amazon who have changed my expectations of how I can integrate with a provider across any industry. And so it's really important for companies to take inspiration from market leaders like Amazon as they apply them to their industries, whether that be utilities or healthcare.
Well, and similarly, I'd be curious to get your perspective on, I'm reminded that years ago we considered tech a sector. And aren't all companies now tech companies? That is there a need for a tech sector because all companies have become tech companies? I mean, similar to the example that you shared around B2C expectations are now B2B expectations.
Yeah, I think so. Yes and no, right? I think the biggest mistake an organization can make today, and we're seeing it happen across the board, we are now seeing a lot of technology and specifically product talent become available on the market, right? And so organizations that didn't traditionally have internal product teams are hiring them, or they're buying product orgs and bolting them on. But without knowing how to organize them, how to help them work on outcome-based milestones, or finding the right work that talent will find fulfilling, we won't be able to keep them or extract the right amount of value from them. And so my point is, while there's a ton of talent on the market, make sure as you're pulling that through and into your organization that you're doing it in a meaningful way that will ultimately be mutually beneficial for the org and for the talent.
Casey, this reminds me of a quote from Pablo Alejo here at West Monroe. Every industry and every organization is always just one innovation away from complete market disruption. If you're not leaning into innovation by digitizing your business, you're just waiting to be disrupted and left behind. Sounds like you agree?
Completely agree. And I think figuring out what you mean by digitizing your business is important, and making sure that all employees know what that means. Because as we've talked a lot at West Monroe, right? Digitizing the back office, becoming digital means different things to different people.
That's right. The second trend is the proof positive need for methodical end-to-end due diligence in M&A. How are we seeing this show up in the market today?
Proliferation of data has changed the game from a data perspective. And now there's so much data that we can use to make faster, better decisions without the human blinder component. And what's interesting is I feel like within COVID, not to point back to COVID, but we started changing the way that we did diligence out of necessity, which really forced us to lean in to data more. When we couldn't be on site, we couldn't do some of the more anecdotal analysis that we did. And because of that, we now have a better approach to decision making, and we need to use it everywhere to inform all cases, including M&A. And what's interesting is we see how that's what it is. It's really starting from a why it matters perspective to change the decisions that investors are making in order to see the returns on their investments. And so as I think about how do you then apply that as a private equity firm, right? Or any strategic buyer, right? Because right now in the market, it goes beyond just PE firms, and there's a ton of opportunity to acquire strategically. It's really focused on not buying into the hype and not just considering the risk. You have to look at everything from both lenses. Just because you have cash on hand doesn't mean you have to spend it. And you have to find the right fit. And I think that focusing on this type of insight is going to be key to where we come on the outside of the current market environment that we're in.
And it sounds like from what you're saying that this is broader than M&A, that this has far-ranging implications.
Yeah, I think to invest or acquire only when there's strong evidence that you'll be able to drive profitable growth on the outset and achieve a hopeful return on your investment is the wrong approach. And that's really, in today's environment, that's every buyer, which is organizations acquiring smaller organizations, the merging of two entities, and private equity. And I think historically, we saw this type of diligence, technology, digital or otherwise, either get scoped down or out, especially in strategic investment decisions. And now with the digitization of everything, we're seeing it become a larger priority for every investment. And investments and capitalizing on digital advantages, in my opinion, will be the driver of growth and return on investments in the future.
Well, and to your point earlier, the investment is making choices. When everything is moving so fast, innovation, AI, et cetera, it can be hard to slow down and prioritize due diligence. How do you balance speed and risk reduction?
To me, and I said this a few seconds ago, just because you have money on hand doesn't mean you should make the investment. So to invest or acquire only when there's strong evidence that you'll be able to drive profitable growth for a target company and achieve the hope for return is a really important piece. And you gain that knowledge by looking proactively and holistically at every deal, which means you have to look at how they're serving their customers, how they're using technology to help their employees do their jobs better and faster, right? Historically, we saw this type of diligence get scoped out or down. But with the digitization of everything, we're really seeing this be an even larger priority for every investment. Investments that capitalize on digital advantages, in my opinion, will be the driver for growth and return on investments in the future.
I like what you just said there too about the digitization of everything. That feels like a nice title for something else that we do at some point in the future. Okay. The third trend is about the symbiotic relationship between technology and customer trust. This is a big one because trust is so important in the client-company relationship and directly impacts the bottom line. Is there an example that comes to mind for you that brings this one to life?
Yeah, so I'll point to the one that I think was top of mind to everybody around the holidays last year, which was the Southwest Airlines example, the holiday operational meltdown that it was, right? Southwest had spent a lot of time on the app and the interface, but not so much time on their back-end technology. And as a result, they lost over $1 billion from lost revenue, from canceled flights, refunds, and reimbursements to passengers. And in Q1 of 2023, that trickled in at $160 million more, right? And if you know now, what they weren't investing in was the back-end technology, the less sexy of the two, right? And so in 2023, Southwest has committed to spending $1.3 billion on IT maintenance and upgrades as a follow-up to what happened in December of 2022. And it could have been avoided had they been investing over time in their back-end technology versus focusing only on what they felt the customer could see and feel.
Great example, Casey. So what's the action? What would you recommend people be doing as a result of that story that you just shared?
First and foremost, ensure that you're investing in the right back-end tech to keep operations running smoothly, even if it's not the sexy thing or getting you noticed by the press. Passengers won't care how great the app is if they cannot get on the airplane. And trust will erode much quicker when the operations break down than they will if you don't have the sleekest app. I always say, think about this as the steak versus the sizzle. If you don't invest in core background operational tech, you're not able to deliver on what is ultimately the most important things, what your customers actually want and need from you. And in the Southwest case, getting on the plane that takes off and lands on time and being able to actually get to their destination is more important than the app itself.
I completely agree. The action that you were just describing reminds me of conversations I've had on recent podcast episodes with Mark Browning of Exelon and Tracy Sala of Highmark Health. In both cases, we talked about the importance of establishing that customer relationship, being obsessed with your customers, and that means not letting them down over a lack of investment in something that should be table stakes.
Exactly.
The fourth trend is the business risks and opportunities of new workforce needs. Walk us through what this trend is and why it matters and what we should be doing as a result.
Yeah, so there's a lot in this one, right? Top employers of tech talent these days are no longer including just traditional technology companies. They're expanding into organizations in the banking and financial services sector, the consulting space, healthcare, retail, and even defense. And with recent tech industry layoffs, injecting this fresh digital savvy talent into the market, the balance could tilt even further towards non-tech companies, right? That's a big deal. In fact, more than half of the displaced tech workers have found jobs outside of that sector already in 2023. And so because there's a lot of technology or digital talent in the market, which wasn't previously available, companies are now starting to hire this talent, which is changing the dynamics of corporate America. And so if you think about why that matters, right? According to IDC, by 2026, enterprises that didn't effectively address their organization's talent and digital skills gap will constrain their revenue growth by 20%. So what do I do now to make sure I'm not one of those companies, right? How do I prevent all of my competitors investing in acquiring this talent and me falling behind? And so what I would tell industry companies to do as they scoop up former tech employees, they need to leverage those skills to further digitize their organizations, which means all organizations should be looking outside of their industry for that digital first talent. And they should lean into that talent to help close the digital skill gap of the existing employee base. But at the same time, those talent markets remain extremely competitive, particularly for this tech-savvy talent and workforce. And so with a long-term focus and understanding where you go from here, we really have to make sure that we're putting this talent to work on the most critical issues, leaning into technology to automate some of the dull, dangerous, or dirty work, and deploying the human beings to do the more insightful and impactful things that an organization needs and that will provide those employees greater fulfillment.
Okay, so Casey, with the opportunity to scoop up this tech talent or digital talent that you were just mentioning, what if companies don't have the budget to hire net new roles right now? What else could businesses be thinking about with regards to their workforce?
That's why organizations really need to develop more effective ways to upskill and reskill their talent with a digital first mindset. And those initiatives should be run centrally as part of the overall talent strategy. Who do you hire? Who do you train? How do you evolve your workforce? What's interesting to me is 27% of C-level executives see the lack of digital skills across their organization as one of their top 5 hurdles to digital initiatives. However, according to Gartner, 80% of those same employers or employees are unprepared to do their current and future roles, which will lead to $442 million in annual missed revenue per organization. So they see this big challenge coming and they don't know how to overcome it. So I share that stat because if you're feeling stuck and you don't know where to start, you're not alone. But I think it's important to think about the strategy of an organization holistically and pick the one or two things that are fundamentally required to change the trajectory of that business and invest in those skills. For a lot of organizations right now, that is data fluency. So it's not just access to data anymore, but it's understanding how to use it across the organization, even roles that were traditionally not data oriented.
Well, it sounds like you're really advising that people need to say no so that they can focus on the one or two key priorities, and strategy is choosing what not to do.
100%. And it's hard to say the time to start is now because of the economic conditions we're in, but the time to start is now. And businesses have to be focused on near-term sustainability while overcoming future market constraints. And and to place bets today, you have to be able to say no to some things and turn things off so that you can have greater impact in the back end.
We've made it to the fifth and final trend, the rise of generative AI. And this was the last point of our piece because it really is it's a thread that runs through all of the trends that we just covered off on. Could you walk us through why it matters and then what actions people should be taking?
As organizations define and refine their AI goals and strategies, it's crucial to remember that AI is not and never will be a complete solution on its own. But here's what it is. It's a powerful enabler for digital businesses that can augment and improve the output and results of their people. It's another tool to be used to drive greater value from the employees of an organization, change how we serve customers, change how we run operations. But it has to work in uniform with the people. And so how do you start is the natural next question. And our belief is that human beings need to be the interface between Gen AI and the world. So you need to be investing in the right employees who can build the models, instruct the models, redesign the models when needed, get new data, because all the AI in the world is nothing without the human component. If you don't have enough internal digital first skills, such as data literacy, you're not going to be able to take advantage of Gen AI. And because there's a ton of business value out there, assuming you are leveraging the right use cases, you need to also think about how it can be applied to your specific business in your industry to make it the most applicable. And to do that, before you do anything else, you have to get your house in order, right? You have to build up your own digital maturity, be able to capitalize on investments like this, make sure that your employees have the right skills, you have the right access to data. And then that human component really is what takes it to the next level. The creativity, the intuition, the empathy, the emotions, and morality. No AI or ML model is a true replacement for the human being's expertise and experience. And so that's really where we try and tell clients to start first.
Well, and what it sounds like you're describing is almost a Gen AI readiness assessment of how ready is your organization to seek or find the value or the benefits of generative AI. And it reminds me on the podcast that we recently recorded with Mark Browning from Exelon, he was talking about that idea of the importance of a roadmap. And is the assessment of your Gen AI readiness step 0 before you really create that roadmap?
Well, I almost think your digital agility or digital maturity is step 1. And then I think step 2 is then how does a tool like Gen AI play into that mix? And then how does that layer into your employees? And how does that layer into your people, into your and customers, right? Because it's those building blocks that will make you stand out. But you have to think about it holistically. It's not, and that goes back to what I was saying earlier about shiny objects, right? It's not enough to invest in the tool and the shiny object and think about the flashiest use case. It's what are the brass tacks problems you're trying to overcome in your industry, and how can this tool be another asset to you? One of many.
Well, it sounds like you're advocating for how can the tool augment your fundamentals or augment the core of your business?
Yes. And how can it help you deliver against your strategic direction? Where are you going? How do you want to differentiate? And how can this help?
Casey, as we wrap up, are there any final takeaways that you'd like to share with our listeners?
So these probably won't be a surprise, Rissa, but I point to 2 things. Changing mindsets continues to be extremely important. The future isn't theoretical concepts anymore. Innovators and game changers are building the future every day. It is here. And as long as your organization takes the time to design where you're headed, it will become clearer to all employees where they should place their bets and where they should say no. Because ultimately, investments in innovation will drive the growth, but you have to make choices along the way, which is something you pointed to earlier. And then the second thing I would say is maintaining the balance between the current challenges as well as the future challenges. Right now, it is really hard for people to keep one foot in the present and one foot in the future. But that's really what's required as we think about the long-term implications of the tech trends impacting the businesses we're serving today, which are different than the economic trends that we're living in every minute of today.
Well, and with, in thinking about keeping one foot in the present and one foot in the future, is that the right split? Is it 50-50, that you should be 50% focused on the present and 50% focused on the future? Or is it a different mix?
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, and this is going to be a very consultative answer, I think it depends on your specific business and how much the current economic conditions are impacting you. You can't think too much about the future if you're worried about surviving today. And so I'm not naive to that, but I do think if you're thinking 0% about the future, it's going to be very hard for you to sustain and grow on the other side of today's economic conditions.
Well, Casey, thank you. This has been a great conversation. For our listeners, where can they find the ebook to learn more?
www.westmonroe.com/tech trends.
Great. My final question is one that we like to ask all of our guests around what does digital mean to you? Now, since you have answered this question on a previous episode, I wonder if you might like to answer this based on recent client conversations that you may have had. What does digital mean?
Yeah, I love that question because it means something different to everybody, right? And what I love is when we find the threads that tie clients together. And so I was recently talking to a few clients in the healthcare space, and they really grounded in 2 ideas that I subscribe to. The first is digital is about providing employees the right tech, the right org structure, and the right methodologies to fundamentally change from the inside out. So said more simply, it's the right resources to move from very traditional ways of working. So historically, decision making based on anecdotal evidence, hierarchical organizations, systems first deployment, to digital ways of working, human centered, access and use of data to make harder, more accurate decisions that all influence easier growth, which I really thought was a very simple way of breaking it down and speaks a little bit to the steak versus the sizzle, right? We have to invest in what truly supports the business in the back end to get to the sizzle in the long run. The second was outcome-based milestones that require nimble teams that hold each other accountable and pivot when necessary. And while that sounds super easy, reshuffling or changing the mindset of how teams perform and going back to knowing when to say no and opt out of things and shift priorities and focus is going to be key to the future. And if you're outcome-based from a milestone perspective, you can know very quickly if you're on the right path.
Fantastic. Well, Casey, thank you so much for another terrific episode of This is Digital.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to This is Digital. If you enjoyed today's show, please follow or subscribe on your preferred podcast app. And don't forget to leave us a review. For more information on This is Digital, visit westmonroe.com/thisisdigital.